This week I was sitting down, we're looking at 2021 as a family and just trying to decide what are some different things that we can do, some home projects, stuff that we'd like to see improved throughout the year. And so we were talking about maybe doing some stuff in our kitchen. Now, for those of you, you've been home for this past year, cooking has become like a major event for a lot of us. It's the most we get to do, and it certainly has been that for us and our family. We try to pick a cooking night during the week that's special, and we get in there and chop things and make fun foods. And so investing in the kitchen seemed to make good sense for us. And so we're talking through some of the improvements we've made already. We added a new sink in there, and we just added a fridge that we can store some more stuff in. And so we're dreaming about these different projects and thinking about what we can do. And Amy, my wife, turns to me and says, "But no tiling, right?" Now, that may seem like an odd plea from a spouse. And here's the odd thing. I've only ever tiled for our family once. Just once. And you might say, "Oh, well, I know where this story is going. You tried to do it and it ended up being all wonky and crazy and looked bad." But no, actually, the end product turned out beautiful. Actually, we got a picture right here. So the end product, a tiling, actually ended up looking very good. But the process of me doing it was not beautiful. I had the best laid plans. I was starting early in the morning. I thought this would be so easy to do. I even told Amy, "Hey, later on, after I'm done with this, we're going to go out tonight." And so it began. And my big problem, though, I think, was where I put the tile saw. I put it down in the basement. And so every single time I had to go in and cut another piece, I had to walk down 2 flights of stairs, cut this little 8-inch piece of tile, then walk back up the stairs, put it in position, and so on and so on. So after about the 300th trip up and down the steps, my legs were on fire, and I was absolutely miserable. And sometimes you get into a place in a project where you're miserable, you hate everything that you're doing about it, but you almost hate it so much you can't conceive of stopping until it's done, because then it would have won, right? So that was the point I was at, and I was miserable, and I decided in my wisdom, if I was going to be miserable, I'm going to make everybody miserable around me all at the same time. So as they're coming in, they're trying to check on me like, "How are you doing in there?" I was just laying out the misery in every conceivable direction. So we may be doing some projects this year, but not tiling. We will not be doing tiling. Now, I don't know if that ever describes you. You get so involved in a goal or a project that you tend to get hyper-focused on it and you lose sight of what's most important. Now, I know either that describes many of you or you've experienced some of that, because if that wasn't true, then this meme, which has been all over the internet probably for the last 6 months, would not ring true to so many of you. You think you can hurt my feelings? I used to hold the flashlight for my dad, right? I'm that dad. I am that dad. And you probably have that potential in you as well. And it doesn't have to necessarily be tiling work that you're doing. It could be lots of things. Maybe you've set a goal this year of being a healthier person. You want to lose some weight, but in your focus on that one goal, you're taking all of your anger out on your friends and family members, the very people you're trying to be healthy for. Or maybe it's some award that you're seeking to obtain this year, and you get super competitive while you're doing it, and you end up burning a lot of friendships and relationships with the people in your life in order to get this goal. But when you get there, the very people you want to celebrate with don't want to have anything to do with you. Maybe it's an easy goal. Maybe in life, you're not driven in those ways. You just want to make everybody in your family circle happy, and you're trying so hard all the time to balance what everybody needs to be happy, that you work so hard trying to do that in the end, what you end up with, nobody's happy anymore. And certainly you're not happy, but that goal became such a focus that you lost sight of what ultimately was important. As Pastor Adam mentioned, today we're continuing a series in the book of Nehemiah, Rebuild, Life Lessons from Nehemiah. And Nehemiah had a great goal as well. In 450 BC, his goal was to rebuild the wall surrounding the capital city of Jerusalem. And as we've seen in our previous two messages, he began this goal, this project very well. He started with prayer. He began seeking the Lord's help throughout all of it. And yet somewhere along the journey, he lost focus of what was most important as he pursued this overarching goal. And I think as we're entering the year 2021, that's the very danger each one of us are facing. As we view a year in which we're hoping to rebuild lots of things, we may forget the lessons that we learned coming out of last year, and we may begin to prioritize doing things and making goals and forgetting about the human cost that is associated with all of our busyness in life. And so the point that I think we need to remember, and what's going to be the summary of my main idea for today's message, is this. This is our big idea for the day. The future is rebuilt out of the builders. That whatever future we're attempting to create, in the end, it is ultimately rebuilt out of the people that we do the work with. And so it's the people who are involved in the things that we do who help make up the future of what we experience once we are done. And if we lose sight of them, we may end up crossing the finish line all alone. So we need to be careful not to build our dreams on top of the people in our lives, but to build it with them, because the future is rebuilt out of the builders, the very people who God has placed in our lives to do the stuff with. We're to see this lesson, this idea throughout the message in Nehemiah, and we're going to try to apply that also to our lives. So let's take a look at Nehemiah, this book in the Bible by the same name. We're going to actually be looking in chapter 5 of that book. And at this point in the rebuild, the building of the wall is about a 2-month process from what we understand. So they're somewhere midstream of this build, and they're encountering the human cost associated with this great goal that they have. Let's read the first couple of verses here from Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, and see who's paying the cost. It should be on the screen here. Now, it begins, "Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers." We'll see that point here in a minute. "For there were those who said," now this is the outcry, this is what they're saying, "with our sons and our daughters, we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive." Now, I just want us to pause here for a moment and see who isn't mentioned in this text. We've got the wives who are mentioning the sons and the daughters, all leaving out one important group, the husbands, because they're the ones who are involved in this rebuild project. So as they're busy off somewhere rebuilding the wall, the ones whom they have left behind, the home, their wives, their sons and daughters, are suffering the unintended consequences of this great project. without the husbands there, they're not getting enough food. And so they're coming to Nehemiah and other leaders and say, we're a lot of mouths to feed here. We need food if we're going to survive this great and lofty goal that you've set out. Now, things in Jerusalem in this time were already difficult. It's not as though this building project was some source of all the issues that they were having at that time, but it exacerbated a lot of the difficulties associated with rebuilding a nation in this particular time. And so it brought a lot of those issues to a head and forced the people who were left behind to begin to sell their future in order to survive the present. And we see that in the next couple verses here in chapter 5, how they had to essentially and literally mortgage their future in order to survive. Notice how the reading continues. There were those who said, and now here's more quotes from these various people coming, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine." There were others who said, "We've borrowed money for the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers," meaning, hey, we're all the same here. "And our children are as their children, yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already become enslaved, but it's not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards." They are selling their future in order to survive the present. They're mortgaging their property or even selling it, or what's worse, and it seems to be the note that they end on here, they're selling the future generation in order to survive the present. They're giving their children to indentured servitude in order to survive, but that's the very generation that they're trying to survive for. Selling their future in order to survive the present. And what is worse, and maybe you even picked up on it in the reading, this is something that they're doing to each other. This isn't some outside force outside of the wall that's doing it to the people of Israel. These are their fellow Israelites who are wealthier and more influential than they are, seizing upon this opportunity to make themselves rich at the cost of the other people who are in the city with them trying to rebuild this wall. Notice how the narrative continues in verses 6 through 8. Now Nehemiah is picking up, okay? So this is him talking after he's taken all these complaints. He's like the complaint department. He says, "I was very angry when I heard their outcry of these words, and I took counsel with myself. And I brought charges against the nobles and the officials." These are the wealthy and individuals in that culture. "I said to them, 'You're exacting interest, each from his brother.' And I held a great assembly against them, and I said to them, 'We, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. But you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us.'" We're going to come back to that line here in a moment. But the clear picture is those who are rich and more secure are seizing upon this moment of financial insecurity to fatten their own wallets. They're charging an interest rate against their own fellow citizens, which is so high that they know sooner or later the very property that they're mortgaging is going to become theirs. They're going to gain possession of their lands and their homes over against their poorer Israelite brothers and sisters. Kind of reminds me of an old movie. I know it's kind of dates me a little bit, but It's a Wonderful Life. Right? It's kind of unavoidable, like to get through the holiday season without at least seeing Jimmy Stewart at one time in It's a Wonderful Life. And in that movie, there's a financial crisis. They depict what it was like in the Great Depression, and there's a bank run. And Jimmy Stewart, who is George Bailey in the movie, he owns the Bailey Building and Loan. And it's his wedding day, and there's a run on the bank. And so people are storming in there because they're just not sure if their money is going to be safe anymore. And so they're rushing in to the Bailey Building and Loan to get their money out because there's this other guy in town who's kind of the villain character, Old Man Potter. Old Man Potter. You can only say it that way. And he's offering everybody who feels the pinch and the fear of this moment 50 cents on the dollar to cash out their shares with the Bailey Building and Loan and come get half of what their money's worth from him at the bank. He's taking his security as a wealthy individual and leveraging it against the other people who are less secure. And the amazing thing about It's a Wonderful Life, and hey, I don't want to, no spoil alerts here, but the amazing thing about the story is George Bailey gets the chance to actually see what the future would hold for a world that is like this, right? That's like the whole premise of the movie. He gets to see what life would be like if he never lived, and he gets to see what happens to his town if this kind of thinking takes over, and the town ends up becoming Pottersville, this horrible place where nobody's thriving. There's no joy in this city. The people are cutthroat. They're always just trying to barely survive, and the only one who's thriving is Old Man Potter. And when you see him, he's not even very happy either. He's just an old, grumpy guy. And there's no future in this mentality where we are seeking our own advantage over against each other. In fact, Nehemiah hints at the fact that there's no future here. He has kind of that cryptic line that ends our last reading where he's hinting at that this is really not getting them anywhere. This is what he says. He says, "We, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations," right? They were sent into exile, and now they have the opportunity of bringing them home. But he turns around and says, "But you would sell them that they would be sold to us." He's basically saying, hey, wake up. We're going in circles here. We're trying to rebuild this wall, and yet you're tearing down what we're trying to rebuild just as fast as we're trying to rebuild it. I mean, the whole purpose of having a walled city is so that the people contained within its walls can thrive socially and economically, that they can have a place that's safe from outsiders who can just come in and steal what they've done. And so they're building this wall in order to build a future for everybody inside, and yet they're having to sell the very future of the people who are inside of it in order to build the wall that's there to secure their future. And so they're going in circle. I mean, Nehemiah raises, I think, a super insightful question, which is, what good is a wall going to do if the danger is already inside? And it's inside of each and every one of them. So if they don't solve this issue, there is no future for that people, because as our big idea reminds us, the future is rebuilt out of those who are building with us. I know we're not all building walls at home, but there are tons of ways that we can do this ourselves. It's kind of cliche, but this is like the parent who spends all their time trying to provide for their family, and they're spending all their time trying to provide for their family, but they're never investing in their family, the family that they're providing for. They're busy outside trying to get things for their family, but there's no one there who wants them or the things by the time they're done. It's like running a business that is maybe super successful and in tons of ways, but nobody wants to show up and work there. Not even you. So you're terribly successful, but you don't want to be there, and nobody working there wants to be there either. What future do we have if we don't have it alongside of the people we're on the journey with? Because here's the bottom line. That at the end of the day, after the finish line is crossed, after we've checked off all the boxes, at the end of the day, standing at the finish line, it's still just us. It's still just us. The people who have linked arms with us to walk this life together. And if we get to the finish line and we've run at such a pace that we end up being all alone, what good is that for any of us? Our future is rebuilt out of the builders, the very people we get to do these things with. But if they're not alongside of us all the way, then we find ourselves celebrating alone. So what good is a wall when the danger's already inside? And it truly is inside each and every one of us. All of us have this potential to get so focused on the things of life that we're willing to trade any human cost in order to accomplish them. We get so terribly focused, especially in times of crisis, that sometimes we can't think about the other people around us. It reminds me, almost a year ago is when all of us went home, and I had the privilege of offering the first video message that we did during our stay-at-home time, and I began that message with a roll of toilet paper, and I said, "Can we talk about this?" Because there was no toilet paper anywhere to be found. And that's natural, right? When there's a crisis and there's difficulty, it's easy for us to concern ourselves with making sure that we have enough, that we're taking care of our own. And that I totally understand that impulse, each one of us, that mama bear impulse that's inside every single one of us. But as we move into the time of rebuilding, we need to switch over to become a people who are looking out for each other, who learn how to love and serve and give to other people, or we'll never rebuild this thing together. That's a lesson that Nehemiah actually gets to model in the very end of chapter 5. At the end of the chapter, we hear a little vignette about how Nehemiah, even though he was the governor of Judea, he had certain privileges because he had that position. He refused to accept those privileges, in particular, like a stipend, a little salary, because he knew the impact it would have on other people. He saw the human impact, and he decided to serve through generosity rather than take, and make sure that he was taken care of. Notice what he does, and this is kind of right at the end of the chapter 5. This is Nehemiah's example. It says, "Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judea, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Xerxes," got through it, "the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor." So he's not taking this particular right of his. "The former governors," these are bad guys, "who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver." That's like a weight of silver. "Even their servants lorded it over the people. but I did not do so because of the fear of God. Nehemiah's position, he was offered some food rations because of his position. He refuses to take it because he sees the human cost associated with it. He says it would be a heavy burden, and he didn't want to be the kind of leader who lorded it over the people, which is an interesting line, and we're going to see a very similar verse that uses that same language here in a moment. But Nehemiah is modeling an attitude here that he realizes he can't rebuild his future on the heads of other people. He can't push other people down in order to elevate himself. Either they all get there together or it's not going to be worth the journey. And so he's willing, through sacrificial generosity, to offer what he can, his privilege as a governor. He trades his privilege for an opportunity for other people to thrive. And in doing so, actually models the very attitude that Jesus, when he walked the earth, instilled in his own followers as the very way that they were going to live out the story of his forgiveness, redemption, and community. So one day Jesus is walking along the road with his first followers, and his followers, his disciples, are fighting about who's going to be in first place, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom that Jesus is building. And, Jesus is, he's hearing all this, he's hearing, and he pulls the car over, and he sits them all down, and he says this, Matthew 20, 25 to 28. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, everybody, the rulers all around us, they lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, even as the Son of Man, that's Jesus' way of describing himself, even as I came not to be served, to be served, but to serve, and to give my life a ransom for many. See, Jesus tells this story as he's walking along the dirty road to Jerusalem. He knows what will await him there. He'll be falsely accused, arrested, tried, and then executed, nailed to a cross where he will, in God's design, offer his life as a ransom, a buyback, a substitute for many. And as Christians, we understand that this offer of Jesus' life for ours, this is how we begin our journey. This is how we begin our walk of faith, with an acknowledgement that through Jesus taking his great and enormous privilege as God's very Son, and using that to offer this perfect life on our behalf, that because he was willing, through sacrificial generosity, to leverage his life for us, we get to begin the journey of faith. But that's just the beginning of the journey when we place our faith in Jesus. Every day after that, we take our next steps of faith. And every one of those steps models the first, where if we want to be great, we learn to serve. Through sacrificial generosity, we use what advantages we have to see other people thrive, just as Jesus did for us as well. You see, Jesus is traveling with his fighting disciples, and he knows if this community, this church that he's making is going to survive, they need to get this lesson down. That the only way that they're going to build a future together is not by them competing with one another, but by loving and serving one another, putting each other first. And I think that's probably the best next step that each one of us can take with us here today. And so here is a next step for you to consider. that as you go about your week, consider what opportunities you have to help other people rebuild this week. What are other people in your life trying to accomplish? What are they struggling with? And what do you have that God has uniquely given to you that enables you to maybe come alongside of them, to give them a leg up, to help them get further along in the journey? Because at the end of the day, those are the people we're going to be enjoying this life with. And if we can love them through sacrificial generosity, not only do we model the very life that Jesus has offered to us, we reveal his character to them and his grace to them as well. So as we focus on rebuilding our own lives in 2020, let's not forget to look at those around us and to offer them help as well. Let me conclude. We talking about the building of this wall that Nehemiah did. And as I was sharing this with my kids this week, they reminded me of a story of another wall that was rebuilt, the Great Wall of China, which interestingly, so if timeline-wise, about 200 years after Nehemiah builds this wall, the beginning of the Great Wall of China began. Although it began under a different mentality. So the Great Wall of China, much like Nehemiah's wall, was an arduous task. There was no heavy machinery to move equipment, just the people and the laborers. And it was very intense and very costly. And what would happen when they were building the Great Wall of China, if somebody died in the making of the wall, they actually had no time to bury them elsewhere. They buried them in with the wall and kept on going because the focus was entirely on getting the job done and not the cost that was associated along with it. They built the wall not with the workers, but on them. And that's the danger each one of us can face if we lose sight of what is ultimately most important. As we're entering this new year with all these new opportunities and new things beginning, if we get focused again on the goals that we have and we lose sight of the people who are all around us, if we're not careful with how we build, we can build on the same mistakes that we've built on from years in the past. And we can get to the end of our journeys and find ourselves all alone. But if we want to rebuild something great in 2021, we need to model Jesus' words that greatness comes through service, so through seeing other people thriving all around us. Because the future is always rebuilt out of the builders. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you would take all of who you are, your Son, Jesus, and have him come to live and to love and to serve us so that we can participate in your kingdom and know you as our true Father. Thank you for that demonstration of what it means to be great. And as you continue to use your Spirit to empower us to take our next steps of faith, help us to step forward with that same attitude as we begin this new year, and grant us eyes to see those around us who may need our hand, and let's build with them together so that you can be honored and your Son's name can be known. We pray this in his name. Amen.